Hello. Tonight you find yourself drifting through a vast ancient silence between two great rivers, where time feels almost suspended and the land seems to breathe in slow motion. You notice history here does not rush, but settles softly like dust on forgotten stone. Beneath this quiet world, power forms silently beyond hearing. It feels like Earth is buffering, slow and patient, like an old computer. You stand in Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers slowly trace ancient paths across warm plains shaped by endless sediment layers. The land feels like an unread book of geological memory. Even the air seems to remember water, and your thoughts move gently, like they are half asleep. Across this landscape, early settlements appear as delicate marks within vast natural rhythms of sand and water. Archaeological evidence shows communities depended on seasonal floods for survival and planning. People likely watched rivers with quiet patience, seeking guidance. Even camels, if organized, would probably still arrive fashionably late but calm. So, before you get completely comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy what we're creating here. You are invited to share in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, slowly dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan, letting the steady hum of the air fill the room. And in that gentle rhythm, we quietly step into tonight's journey together. In this quiet river basin, you begin to understand that water is not just a resource, but a slow architect of civilization itself. The Tigris and Euphrates carry sediments that reshape entire plains over thousands of years, a process documented in modern geological stratigraphy. Ancient communities would have experienced this as a living, changing map beneath their feet. It feels almost like the rivers are doing slow yoga stretches across the land. You walk mentally along the riverbanks where early agriculture begins to emerge in scattered experimental plots of barley and wheat. Studies of early irrigation show that water channels were carefully redirected even in pre-urban phases of Mesopotamian life. These systems created predictable rhythms that encouraged settlement stability over time. It is strangely comforting, like discovering that even ancient farmers were improvising just like modern people assembling IKEA furniture without instructions. As you move deeper into this landscape, proto-urban centers appear where mud brick buildings slowly rise from the soil. Excavations at Eridu show repeated rebuilding layers, revealing long-term habitation cycles. Each structure reflects gradual adaptation, not sudden change. The scene feels like a city loading itself one slow, historical texture at a time. You notice that climate in this region plays a subtle but constant role in shaping human behavior. Paleoclimatic data suggests periodic shifts in rainfall patterns influenced agricultural productivity and settlement density. These changes were gradual, almost imperceptible within a single human lifetime. People likely adjusted without dramatic awareness, like slowly lowering the volume of a song without realizing it has already become a whisper. In these early communities, social organization begins to form around shared access to water and fertile land. Anthropological studies suggest that cooperative irrigation systems encouraged early forms of governance and record-keeping. Decisions were likely made in small assemblies under open skies, where observation of the rivers replaced formal institutions. It feels a bit like group projects today, except everyone actually depended on each other to survive. You begin to sense the importance of memory in a world without permanent written records yet fully aware of repetition and cycles. Oral traditions, likely preserved knowledge of flood timing, soil behavior, and seasonal migration patterns. These collective memories functioned as living archives embedded within human experience. It is almost as if the land itself was a shared hard drive, just without the annoying need for software updates. Archaeological evidence from southern Mesopotamia shows gradual transitions from small villages to larger proto-city settlements. This shift is not abrupt, but layered, reflecting slow aggregation of population and resources. The continuity of pottery styles and building techniques supports this extended timeline of development. You can almost imagine the process as a long, uninterrupted conversation between generations who never quite finished speaking. You now drift closer to the symbolic origins of writing, where administrative marks begin to appear on clay surfaces. Early tokens used for trade and storage evolve into more complex accounting systems. This transformation, documented at sites like Uruk, represents one of humanity's earliest structured information systems. It feels surprisingly relatable, like upgrading from handwritten grocery lists to digital reminders that you still somehow ignore. In these administrative spaces, labor and resources are tracked with careful precision. Temple economies manage grain, livestock, and seasonal work, creating quiet stability across communities. Record-keeping feels almost meditative, like calmly organizing invisible patterns of life in a steady, unhurried rhythm that quietly sustains society across time. Evening. Light settles over ancient plains as environment and society appear deeply connected. Rivers and soil guide every decision in slow cycles. Conflicts and resolutions follow natural rhythms. History feels like it exhales gently, releasing urgency, like someone finally resting after a long, unnoticed journey. The land itself becomes both stage and participant in history. Sediment slowly reshapes geography and boundaries over immense time spans. Geological records show changes beyond human lifetimes. It is almost humorous that while humans build cities, the earth quietly rearranges everything beneath them. River civilizations emerge not as sudden inventions, but as gradual harmony with natural cycles. Settlements adapt to water, soil, and seasons. Scholars describe this as coevolution between humans and landscape. It feels like nature and humanity slowly learning to dance, sometimes stepping gently on each other's feet. These early systems remain fragile yet persistent through time. Small climate changes shift settlements across generations, yet continuity returns in new forms. Civilization seems to prefer persistence over disappearance, like a candle flame that refuses to go out even when wind tries to disturb it. You drift into a space where rivers, soil, and memory merge into one continuum. The landscape feels present, like a dream before sleep. Everything moves with geological patience, reminding you that even history knows how to rest when silence becomes necessary and time slows almost completely. You drift along the Nile River, where ancient flood cycles rise and fall with a patience that feels almost ceremonial. Historical records from Egyptian inscriptions describe the annual inundation as a predictable blessing, never chaotic, but gently, returning each year like a familiar visitor. The river moves slowly, carrying silt that nourishes fields along its banks. It feels as if time itself prefers walking here instead of running, much like someone avoiding Monday mornings. Archaeological studies from Saqqara reveal burial complexes aligned with agricultural rhythms shaped by Nile flooding patterns. These alignments suggest that spiritual and practical life were closely interwoven in ancient Egyptian culture. The soil left behind by the floodwaters created fertile layers supporting long-term settlement stability. You imagine the river behaving like a careful gardener who never forgets to water anything, even if slightly late sometimes. At Giza, the monumental pyramids rise quietly from the desert edge, their construction deeply connected to organized labor, systems supported by agricultural surplus. Historical evidence shows that seasonal flooding allowed large workforce mobilization during non-farming months. This synchronization between nature and labor created a steady rhythm of construction and life. Even the Sphinx seems to be patiently waiting for better Wi-Fi reception from the stars. The Nile's annual flood was measured by nilometers, ancient structures designed to record water levels with remarkable precision. These instruments allowed administrators to predict harvest yields and adjust taxation systems accordingly. Such early environmental monitoring demonstrates an advanced understanding of natural cycles. It feels like ancient Egyptians were running the world's earliest weather app, only carved in stone and slightly more permanent. You begin to notice how the river acts as both boundary and connection, shaping settlement patterns along its long, narrow corridor. Villages cluster tightly near fertile land, while deserts stretch outward in quiet emptiness. This contrast creates a delicate balance between abundance and scarcity. It is almost like the Nile is a long green ribbon carefully stitched onto a vast beige fabric. The agricultural calendar of ancient Egypt depended entirely on the rhythm of inundation, planting, and harvest. Studies of ancient grain storage reveal highly organized distribution systems managed by temple authorities. This coordination ensured food stability across different regions and seasons. You might think of it as an ancient version of meal prep culture, but with fewer refrigerators and more divine bureaucracy. Religious cosmology in Egypt often reflects the Nile's cyclical behavior, linking rebirth and renewal to its annual flooding events. Deities such as Hapi are associated with life-giving waters that sustain civilization across generations. Rituals are performed to honor this predictable yet essential natural phenomenon. Even gods seem to appreciate a well-timed seasonal schedule that arrives with steady, dependable rhythm. You move along the riverbanks where papyrus reeds grow densely, forming natural corridors for wildlife and early human activity. Botanical studies indicate that these ecosystems supported both construction materials and written communication tools. Papyrus scrolls later become central to administrative record-keeping in Egyptian society. It is oddly poetic that bureaucracy in ancient Egypt may have started with very fancy recycled grass. Trade networks along the Nile connect Upper and Lower Egypt, facilitating exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices. Archaeological findings suggest that river transport was more efficient than overland routes across desert terrain. Boats glide slowly with current assistance, making movement predictable and reliable. It feels like the Nile was nature's original highway, just without traffic jams or aggressive honking. You begin to sense how deeply the river influenced architectural orientation and settlement planning. Many temples and cities were built with direct visual or functional access to the Nile. Water access determined not only survival, but also symbolic alignment with cosmic order. Even modern city planners might quietly envy how naturally everything lined up without software simulations. During periods of high inundation, temporary expansion of water reshapes the landscape dramatically but predictably. These seasonal transformations deposit nutrient-rich silt that rejuvenates farmland year after year. Geological records confirm that this process remained consistent for millennia with minor variations. It is like the Earth itself presses a soft whoa reset button every 12 months without losing any data. The Nile also serves as a timekeeping system, its rhythms embedded into agricultural and ceremonial calendars. Ancient Egyptians divided the year into seasons based on flood cycles rather than astronomical abstraction alone. This practical approach to time reflects a close relationship between environment and daily life in practice today, continuing as a model of environmental awareness and seasonal adaptation. You might say their calendar was less about numbers and more about listening to the river breathe. Time is experienced through seasonal observation, where floods and harvests define rhythm. Rather than abstract measurement, life aligns gently with water, creating a quiet sense of continuity and presence over many generations. As you continue downstream, you notice how stability defines this civilization more than sudden change or disruption. Long periods of continuity allowed gradual accumulation of knowledge, architecture, and administrative systems. Even political shifts often adapted rather than replaced existing structures. It feels like history here prefers gentle editing rather than dramatic rewrites, like someone cautiously fixing typos in a sacred manuscript. The construction of monumental architecture such as temples and pyramids depended on predictable labor organization tied to seasonal cycles. Workers were often farmers during flood seasons, when fields were submerged and unavailable. This dual-role economy reflects an elegant adaptation to environmental constraints. It is almost like ancient Egyptians invented part-time work schedules thousands of years before modern HR departments. You begin to feel the symbolic depth of water in Egyptian thought, where the Nile represents continuity between life, death, and rebirth. Funerary texts often describe journeys across watery realms reflecting this natural metaphor. The river becomes more than geography. It becomes a philosophical framework. Even existential questions seem calmer here. like they have been gently soaked in river water until they soften. As the light of imagination fades into evening tones, you sense how civilizations are shaped less by sudden invention and more by repeated interaction with stable environments. The Nile continues its slow rhythm, indifferent yet nurturing, shaping everything along its path. You feel your thoughts becoming lighter, as if carried by the same current that once moved ancient stone and memory. Everything here flows, but never rushes, inviting rest within its endless return. You drift into the ancient city of Uruk, where the earliest known writing system emerges around 3200 BCE in the form of cuneiform marks pressed into soft clay tablets. Archaeological evidence from the Uruk period shows this began as simple accounting, symbols for trade and labor. Each mark feels heavy, like a footprint on wet earth that refuses to fade. It feels modern, as if the universe just invented spreadsheets for the first time. These early inscriptions gradually expand beyond numbers into structured records of daily administration and exchange. What begins as practical notation becomes a shared language of order and memory. Clay surfaces preserve decisions across seasons, unchanged by time. It feels like thought itself has learned to stay still inside small pieces of earth. The clay tablets are shaped by hand, smoothed carefully, before being inscribed with reed styluses. These tools leave wedge-shaped impressions that later define an entire civilization's record-keeping system. Administrative texts reveal meticulous tracking of grain, livestock, and goods distribution. You imagine scribes working slowly, as if typing on the world's slowest keyboard with zero chance of autocorrect saving them. In temple complexes of Uruk, writing is not an art of expression, but a method of control and memory. Economic transactions are recorded with precision, ensuring that resources flow predictably through society. This structured documentation supports one of the earliest known urban economies in human history. It feels like someone invented bureaucracy and immediately forgot how to turn it off. The social organization of Sumer depends heavily on these written records, which function as external memory for growing populations. Instead of relying solely on oral tradition, communities begin to store knowledge physically. This transition allows cities to expand beyond the limits of human memory. It is like humanity installing a hard drive into civilization without reading the instruction manual first. You walk through reconstructed visions of scribal schools where students learn to press symbols into clay with slow, deliberate motions. Historical tablets show repetitive exercises used to train administrative accuracy. Mistakes are often erased by smoothing the clay and rewriting the symbol. It resembles a classroom where erasers are made of patience rather than rubber. The economy of Uruk relies on temple institutions that manage labor allocation and resource distribution. These early organizations function as both religious and administrative centers. Records show careful scheduling of agricultural work tied to seasonal cycles. You might think of it as ancient project management, except the boss is a temple and the deadline is literally the next harvest season. Clay tablets also reveal early forms of taxation and ration systems used to sustain urban populations. Workers receive grain allocations based on labor contributions recorded by scribes. This system creates a stable but highly structured social order. It feels like a subscription service to survival. Except canceling is not an option, and customer support is non-existent. Archaeological finds show that writing gradually expands beyond economic use into administrative communication between cities. Messages are sent across regions using standardized symbols that remain consistent over time. This consistency allows governance over larger territories. It is almost like ancient Mesopotamia invented email, but every message is permanently archived in pottery. You begin to notice how writing transforms power from spoken authority into recorded permanence. Leaders no longer rely solely on memory or oral decree. Instead, decisions are preserved physically in clay, resistant to alteration. It is as if authority learned how to freeze itself in time, like pressing pause on a civilization mid-breath. The scribes who produce these tablets occupy a specialized and respected role within society. Training requires years of memorization, of symbols and administrative formulas. Their work ensures continuity of governance across generations. You imagine them slightly annoyed, like people doing very important work while everyone else keeps spilling grain like it is decorative confetti. The physical environment of Uruk influences the preservation of knowledge in unexpected ways. Dry. Climate conditions allow clay tablets to survive for millennia, once baked or sun-dried. This accidental durability turns ordinary records into historical archives. It feels like nature itself decided to back up civilization's memory without being asked. Writing begins to shape how time is perceived within Sumerian society. Events are no longer only remembered but documented in sequence and quantity. This creates a new sense of historical continuity beyond oral storytelling. It is like switching from remembering your life as feelings to tracking it as calendar entries and receipts. You move through administrative storage rooms where thousands of tablets are stacked in quiet order. Each tablet holds fragments of economic and social reality, carefully preserved over time. The sheer volume reflects a society deeply committed to structured continuity. It feels like walking through an early data center made of clay and responsibility. Every surface records transactions, grain counts, and labor allocations with careful precision. Nothing feels rushed, only accumulated slowly through seasons of governance and routine administration. The silence of these storage rooms deepens the sense of scale and permanence. It feels as if information itself has taken physical form, resting quietly across layered shelves of time. Religious institutions also begin adopting writing for rituals, myths, and early epic narratives. Cuneiform texts blend mythology with administrative structure, reflecting a unified worldview where the sacred and practical coexist. Even divine stories seem to prefer organized rectangular formats, as if storytelling itself has learned to live inside carefully arranged archival systems. As you observe further, you realize that writing fundamentally changes how humans relate to responsibility and memory. Actions now carry permanent traces that can be reviewed long after they occur. This creates both accountability and continuity across generations. It is like humanity finally learned that forgetting things is not always a feature, sometimes it is a bug. The gradual spread of cuneiform writing across Mesopotamia marks a turning point in human civilization. What begins as simple accounting becomes a foundation for law, literature, and governance. The system evolves slowly but steadily over centuries. You feel as though history itself is quietly upgrading its operating system in the background, without rebooting the world. As the light of this ancient city fades into conceptual dusk, clay tablets remain silent witnesses to early structured thought. Their marks endure long after their makers vanish. Knowledge is stored, not spoken, preserved, in earth, settling into quiet memory awaiting rediscovery. You enter the Old Kingdom of Egypt, where the Great Pyramid of Khufu rises around 2560 BCE as one of the most precisely constructed monuments of the ancient world. Archaeological surveys reveal its alignment with cardinal directions reflects advanced astronomical understanding. The pyramid stands not as a sudden miracle, but as a slow accumulation of organized human effort. It feels like the desert decided to keep a very serious receipt for eternity. The construction of pyramids is not an act of chaos, but of administrative precision and seasonal planning. Workers are organized into small rotating labor groups during the Nile flood season when agriculture pauses. This scheduling allows large-scale construction without disrupting food production. You imagine ancient project managers calmly checking stone quotas while quietly wishing for coffee that does not taste like sand. At the center of this system lies a highly structured bureaucracy that manages resources, labor, and logistics across vast distances. Excavations near Giza reveal worker villages with food supplies, medical care, and administrative records. This indicates a state capable of sustaining complex infrastructure over decades. It feels surprisingly modern, like a government trying to run a construction app without Wi-Fi, but still getting things done. The Pyramid of Khufu, also known as the Great Pyramid of Giza, becomes a focal point of both political authority and cosmic symbolism. Its massive stone blocks are arranged with astonishing geometric precision. Scholars still debate the exact methods used to transport and position these stones. It is as if ancient engineers collectively agreed to build something that would make Future architects slightly nervous. You walk mentally along the Nile corridor where limestone blocks are transported by boats during seasonal floods. Geological studies suggest quarries near Tura supplied fine white limestone for outer casing stones. This transport system depends entirely on predictable river behavior. The whole operation feels like nature and engineering agreeing on a shared calendar without arguments or delay notifications. Workers at construction sites are not slaves in the modern mythic sense, but organized laborers supported by state resources. Archaeological evidence shows evidence of skilled workforce diets and medical treatment. Their work is intense, but structured within cycles of rest and activity. It feels like an ancient version of shift work, except your performance review is written on stone and judged by eternity. The pyramid complex is more than a single structure. It is part of a larger administrative landscape including temples, causeways, and satellite pyramids. These elements function together as an integrated system of ritual and governance. The layout reflects a worldview where architecture mirrors cosmic order. It is like someone designed a city based on the idea that geometry might secretly be a form of prayer. Administrative papyri from later periods suggest detailed accounting of materials such as copper tools, limestone blocks, and workforce allocation. These records reveal an early form of centralized planning. Each resource is tracked with careful attention to efficiency and continuity. You can almost feel the ancient accountants sighing softly as they balance numbers that refuse to behave, like modern spreadsheets. The pyramid's alignment with celestial bodies reflects deep astronomical observation in construction planning. Stars such as Polaris influenced orientation choices. This link between Earth and sky reinforces symbolic meaning. It feels like builders tried to sync construction with the universe's quiet breathing rhythm across time. Religious ideology supports administrative structure by framing construction as sacred duty tied to divine order. The pharaoh is seen as both ruler and cosmic intermediary. This belief strengthens coordination across large labor forces. It is like governance and spirituality forming a long-term partnership without any breakup clause involved. Together, astronomy and belief create a unified system guiding labor, design, and purpose. The pyramid becomes both structure and symbol, grounded in earth yet aligned with sky. It feels like human effort and cosmic rhythm quietly agreeing to move in the same direction across immense stretches of time. You observe how the desert environment itself contributes to the preservation of these monumental structures. The dry climate slows erosion and protects stone surfaces for millennia. This environmental stability allows the pyramids to remain visible across vast spans of time. It feels like the desert is politely refusing to delete history, choosing instead to archive it in plain sight. Transporting massive stone blocks requires coordinated use of sledges, water lubrication, and manpower. Experimental archaeology suggests wetting sand reduces friction significantly. This simple technique demonstrates practical understanding of physics long before formal science existed. It is almost amusing to think ancient engineers discovered slip and slide mechanics without calling it anything fancy. The workforce is supported by supply chains that deliver grain, fish, and meat to construction zones. These logistics networks reflect high levels of planning and resource management. Seasonal abundance from Nile flooding ensures food security during building phases. You might imagine ancient delivery workers grumbling about traffic delays, except the traffic is camels and the delay is eternity. The pyramid complex also functions as a political statement of centralized authority and long-term stability. Its sheer scale communicates power without words or inscriptions alone. Even distant travelers would recognize its significance immediately. It feels like the ancient world installed a giant, "We are very organized here" sign carved out of stone and visible from space. Over decades of construction, knowledge accumulates, and techniques are refined gradually rather than revolutionized. Each generation builds upon the experience of the previous one. This continuity ensures structural consistency and efficiency. It is like civilization slowly updating a shared blueprint without ever fully restarting the project or losing progress. Data as the pyramid nears completion. Its silhouette becomes part of the horizon, blending human effort with natural landscape. The distinction between construction and environment begins to soften. The monument feels less like an object and more like a geological feature shaped by intention. It is as if the desert quietly agreed to hold still while humans finish sculpting time itself. When you finally step back in imagination, the pyramid remains unmoving and patient, a fixed point in a shifting world. Its stones hold the memory of thousands of coordinated lives working in rhythm with river and sky. Everything here feels measured not in years, but in layers of effort stacked gently into permanence. The silence around it is not empty, but carefully constructed like everything else. You drift into the rise of the Akkadian Empire around 2334 BCE, when Sargon of Akkad begins to unify scattered city-states across Mesopotamia. Historical records from later Babylonian sources describe him as one of the first rulers to create a large-scale territorial administration. His influence spreads gradually through conquest and diplomacy. It feels like power here is not running, but slowly walking across a very long map. The expansion of Akkad is not a sudden explosion, but a slow integration of regions connected by trade routes and resource networks. Archaeological findings show standardization of weights, seals, and administration, suggesting coordination. It feels like early globalization, only with donkeys instead of shipping containers. Sargon's reign introduces a centralized authority that extends beyond individual city boundaries. Cuneiform inscriptions record military campaigns and administrative reorganizations across multiple regions. These records emphasize continuity of control rather than abrupt domination. It feels like someone gently tightening a loose knot that keeps refusing to stay in place. Trade networks become the backbone of imperial expansion, linking distant cities through exchange of grain, textiles, and metals. Evidence from seal impressions shows consistent commercial activity across vast territories. This economic integration supports political unification. It is almost like ancient merchants were building the empire faster than the soldiers, just without the paperwork acknowledgement. You observe how geography plays a quiet but decisive role in shaping Akkadian expansion. Rivers, deserts, and steppe regions define natural corridors of movement and limitation. Control of river crossings becomes strategically important. It feels like the landscape quietly negotiates with human ambition across time. The empire's growth follows paths already suggested by terrain and water systems. Expansion is less about force alone and more about adapting to natural routes. Geography shapes decisions continuously. It feels like the land itself is gently guiding movement, setting boundaries that even ambition must learn to respect. The Faust Akkadian administration develops systems to manage distant territories through appointed governors and local intermediaries. These officials ensure loyalty and resource flow back to the central authority. Clay tablets record taxation and tribute, obligations with increasing complexity. You can almost sense early bureaucracy learning how to stretch itself without tearing. Military campaigns under Sargon and his successors extend influence into surrounding regions, including parts of modern Syria and Iran. However, these campaigns often result in assimilation rather than total destruction. Local cultures continue under new administrative frameworks. It feels like different traditions are being gently folded into a larger blanket of governance. You notice that language begins to shift toward Akkadian as a dominant administrative tool across the empire. While Sumerian remains in cultural and religious use, Akkadian becomes widely used in governance. This linguistic adaptation supports centralized communication. It is like everyone slowly agreeing to use the same messaging app, even if they still secretly prefer their old one. The empire's structure relies heavily on written documentation to maintain cohesion across distant regions. Archives preserve contracts, tribute records, and legal agreements. These records reduce uncertainty in governance. It feels like ancient officials discovered that paperwork, despite being annoying, is actually very powerful. Economic redistribution becomes essential in maintaining stability across newly integrated regions. Surplus from agricultural zones is transferred to urban centers and administrative hubs. This flow of resources supports both military and civic infrastructure. You might think of it as an ancient supply chain, except every delay requires divine interpretation instead of customer service complaints. Religious institutions adapt to imperial expansion by integrating local deities into broader pantheons. This syncretism helps maintain cultural cohesion across diverse populations. Temples become centers of both spiritual and administrative activity. It feels like belief systems are quietly merging like overlapping playlists on a very ancient streaming platform. Despite its strength, the Akkadian Empire depends on fragile environmental and logistical balances. Changes in rainfall or river patterns can disrupt agricultural output. Archaeological evidence suggests drought periods may have contributed to later instability. It is like the system runs smoothly until nature slowly lowers the volume knob. Everything appears stable on the surface, yet underlying dependence on climate remains constant. Rivers and crops shape survival more than governance. When conditions shift, the structure adjusts gradually rather than collapsing suddenly. It feels like civilization is quietly balanced on environmental rhythms that never fully pause or disappear. You begin to sense that empire is not a fixed structure, but a dynamic network constantly adjusting to external pressures. Expansion creates new administrative demands that require continuous adaptation. This flexibility allows the system to grow beyond earlier limits. It feels like history is stretching itself carefully, like waking up after a very long nap. Cultural exchange increases as conquered regions contribute new technologies and artistic traditions to the empire. Cylinder seals and pottery styles show blending of regional aesthetics. This exchange enriches identity. Ancient artisans unknowingly participate in the world's earliest design collaboration project across vast distances and cultures over time. Over time, maintaining such a vast territory becomes increasingly complex due to distance and communication delays. Messages travel slowly along trade routes and rivers. Decision-making becomes decentralized out of necessity. It feels like the empire learns that authority must respect travel time across geography and terrain. The legacy of Akkadian expansion influences later Mesopotamian empires that inherit its administrative concepts. Systems of governance and record-keeping persist after fragmentation. Knowledge outlives political borders. It is like ideas refuse to retire, even when institutions that created them have long stopped responding to any form of communication. Administrative networks continue evolving as trade and communication expand slowly across regions. Local governors interpret central directives with increasing independence. This gradual shift creates flexible governance structures. It feels like power is learning to stretch across distance without breaking, adapting to geography like water flowing through uneven terrain. As coordination weakens, regional identities grow stronger while still connected through shared systems. Cultural blending continues through trade and migration. The empire becomes less centralized but more diverse. It is like a single language slowly turning into many dialects that still understand each other through memory and habit. As you drift away, the empire feels less like a solid entity and more like a network of relationships, trade, and memory. Power moves slowly through geography and time. Everything expands without noise, only persistence, like sand reshaping the outline of a forgotten shoreline across endless quiet centuries. You drift into the Assyrian heartland, where the city of Nineveh once stood as a monumental center of imperial authority. Archaeological discoveries from the 19th century reveal vast palace complexes decorated with carved stone reliefs. These images depict military campaigns, royal ceremonies, and controlled displays of power. It feels like history here decided to turn itself into a very serious comic book carved in stone. The Assyrian reliefs are not merely decorative, but function as visual documentation of imperial ideology. Kings are shown in repeated scenes of conquest, hunting, and ritual affirmation. These carvings emphasize order, discipline, and authority across vast territories. You might think of it as ancient propaganda, except it is permanently engraved and refuses to be unfollowed. Excavations at Nineveh, especially in the palace of Ashurbanipal, reveal extraordinary detail in stone craftsmanship. Lions, soldiers, and landscapes are carved with precise attention to motion and anatomy. Despite their violent subject matter, the compositions remain balanced and rhythmic. It feels like someone tried to organize chaos into perfectly aligned stone paragraphs. You observe how these reliefs served both political and psychological functions within the empire. They reinforced the authority of the king to anyone entering palace spaces. Visitors would encounter overwhelming visual narratives of power. It is almost like walking into a room where every wall quietly insists that the government is extremely confident. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, particularly under rulers like Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal, expanded extensively across Mesopotamia and surrounding regions. Historical records describe complex administrative systems supporting these expansions. Reliefs often depict tribute being brought from conquered territories. You might imagine early customs checkpoints, except the penalties involve stone faces staring at you for eternity. Despite their militaristic themes, the reliefs demonstrate remarkable artistic sophistication. The carving techniques create depth and movement within hard limestone surfaces. Artists work with tools that require patience and precision over long periods. It feels like sculptors were doing slow-motion drawing exercises on rock while thinking very seriously about empire branding. The discovery of these reliefs in the 19th century by archaeologists like Austin Henry Layard brings them into modern awareness. Excavations at Nimrud and Nineveh reveal palace walls filled with carved narratives. These findings transform understanding of Assyrian civilization, reshaping history through stone records uncovered beneath desert layers. It is like someone accidentally uncovering an ancient museum that had been patiently waiting under the desert for millennia. Rooms of carved stone emerge intact, carrying stories of power and ritual. The past feels suddenly present again, as if time had quietly preserved everything until discovery restored its voice. You begin to notice how nature has softened the once vibrant colors that likely adorned these reliefs. Traces of pigments suggest that many carvings were originally painted. Time has removed most of the surface color, leaving monochrome stone impressions. It feels like history has been slowly switching from full HD to grayscale without asking anyone's permission. Royal inscriptions accompanying the reliefs provide written context for the visual scenes. These texts describe military campaigns, building projects, and divine support for kingship. Writing and image work together to reinforce imperial authority. You might think of it as ancient multimedia storytelling, except the subscription model lasts forever, and there is no skip button. The depiction of conquered peoples in the reliefs follows consistent artistic conventions. Figures are shown in structured sequences of submission and tribute. These images reflect ideological messaging rather than documentary realism. It feels like the empire carefully curated its own highlight reel, even though everyone else in the footage looks understandably exhausted. Assyrian reliefs also include scenes of royal lion hunts, symbolizing control over chaos and nature. These hunts were highly ritualized events recorded in stone with dramatic detail. Lions are shown in dynamic motion, emphasizing strength and dominance. It is almost like ancient kings were starring in their own nature documentary, except nature does not get a chance to edit the footage. You notice that palace architecture and relief placement are carefully coordinated to guide visitor experience. Walls are arranged in narrative sequences that unfold as one moves through corridors. This creates a controlled journey through imperial imagery. It feels like walking through a museum where the curator is also the king, and the theme is, "Please, remember who is in charge." The Assyrian administrative system supported the creation and maintenance of these monumental artistic programs. Skilled labor, resource allocation, and long-term planning were required. Workshops near palaces produce standardized artistic panels. You can almost sense an early version of project scheduling software, except everything is managed with clay tablets and divine patience. Over time, the empire's territorial expansion places increasing strain on administrative systems. Despite this, the reliefs continue to project stability and control. The contrast between visual certainty and historical complexity becomes noticeable. It feels like a calm face painted over a very complicated internal conversation. The fall of Nineveh in 612 BCE marks the end of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, yet its palace reliefs remain physically intact for centuries. After destruction, they are buried under rubble and sediment. This burial preserves them, allowing modern archaeology to reconstruct Assyrian visual culture and history. These carvings re-emerge through 19th-century excavation, revealing royal power and military scenes. Buried under earth, they are protected from erosion and loss. It is like memory paused underground, patiently waiting for rediscovery by later generations who slowly reconstruct their forgotten visual and cultural history over time. Encountering them through historical imagination, the carvings no longer function as political statements but as preserved moments of human expression. Their authority transforms into archaeological silence. They feel like time capsules in stone. Even power seems to soften, learning to speak more quietly as centuries pass onward. As you observe them further, the reliefs become less about dominance and more about existence. Each carved figure reflects a moment once considered permanent. Now they simply record what was. It feels like stone has learned to remember without judgment, holding only observation across long stretches of time. Drifting away from Nineveh, the reliefs remain as frozen echoes of an empire that once believed in permanence. Time reshapes their meaning gradually. What once declared dominance now records existence. It feels like stone itself understands silence, carrying memory forward without noise, only quiet continuity through endless historical change. You drift into Babylon, where the sun-baked plains hold the memory of one of humanity's earliest legal monuments. The Code of Hammurabi, carved around 1754 BCE on a tall basalt stele, stands as a formal declaration of structured justice. Archaeological studies confirm its placement in a public space for visibility and authority. It feels like law itself decided to become a piece of furniture in the middle of history, impossible to move or ignore. The stele is topped with an image of King Hammurabi receiving authority from the sun god Shamash. This visual reinforces the divine legitimacy of the written laws below. The inscription contains nearly 300 legal provisions covering trade, property, and personal conduct. You might think of it as ancient rulebook energy, except the rules are carved in stone and do not accept updates or patches. Each law in the code reflects a society striving for balance between order and survival in a complex urban environment. Punishments vary depending on social status, revealing a structured but hierarchical system of justice. This framework shows early attempts to regulate human behavior through standardized consequences. It feels like civilization is experimenting with fairness, using very heavy equipment made of basalt and certainty. You walk mentally through Babylonian streets where merchants, farmers, and officials operate under these codified principles. Clay tablets from the period confirm widespread use of written contracts and agreements. These records indicate a growing reliance on documentation for legal enforcement. It is almost like ancient society discovered that remembering promises is easier when you outsource memory to a very permanent notebook. The Code of Hammurabi is one of the earliest known examples of publicly displayed law intended for collective awareness. Its placement suggests that transparency was a key element of governance. Citizens could, in theory, consult the stele to understand consequences of actions. You imagine someone squinting at the stone, silently realizing they probably should not have argued with a neighbor yesterday. Legal principles inscribed on the stele include compensation for injury, theft, and property disputes. The famous principle of proportional justice appears in several clauses. While harsh by modern standards, the system reflects attempts to stabilize social relations. It feels like justice here is being measured with scales that occasionally lean heavily, but never forget they are supposed to balance something. Archaeological discovery of the stele in 1901 at Susa, in modern Iran, brought the text into contemporary scholarship. It was taken as spoils of war by the Elamite king Shutruk-Nahunta, centuries after its creation. This movement of the artifact shows how legal symbols can outlast political boundaries. It is like history misplaced its most serious sticky note and forgot where it originally belonged. The physical structure of the basalt stele ensures its survival across millennia. Hard volcanic stone resists erosion and preserves inscriptions with remarkable clarity. This durability transforms legal text into archaeological permanence. You might think of it as law deciding to choose the most stubborn material available, just to make sure no one could casually erase it. Babylonian scribes play a crucial role in copying and transmitting legal knowledge across the region. Training in cuneiform writing requires years of disciplined practice. These scribes maintain consistency in legal interpretation and record-keeping. It feels like ancient bureaucracy quietly formed a professional class dedicated entirely to making sure everyone reads the same rules slightly less incorrectly. The concept of written law itself marks a shift from oral tradition to fixed documentation. This transition reduces ambiguity and dispute resolution. Decisions no longer rely solely on memory or local interpretation. It is almost like humanity decided that remembering everything mentally was getting too stressful and installed an external, legal hard drive into civilization. Babylon under Hammurabi becomes a center of administrative innovation and territorial organization. The empire expands through both military campaigns and diplomatic integration. Standardized laws help unify diverse populations under a common framework. You can sense an early attempt at coherence, like trying to sync multiple chaotic group chats into a single organized thread. Despite its structured nature, the code still reflects deep social inequalities embedded within the system. Different penalties apply based on class distinctions. This reveals early legal philosophy where order and hierarchy coexist. It feels like justice wears a perfectly ironed robe, yet occasionally trips over its own assumptions. Within this framework, law seeks stability while preserving social ranking as a defining principle. Rules are applied consistently, but not equally, across all groups. You sense a system carefully balancing structure and inequality. It feels like fairness is carefully measured, yet never fully detached from status and position. The stele itself becomes a symbol of authority beyond its functional, legal role. Its public presence reinforces the idea that law is permanent and observable. Citizens experience governance not only through officials, but through monumental stone. It is like the government installed a very serious reminder that cannot be muted or hidden behind notifications. Over time, Babylonian law influences later legal traditions in the region. Elements of structured compensation and codified responsibility appear in subsequent civilizations. This continuity suggests long-term cultural transmission of legal ideas across generations and geography. You might think of it as legal concepts slowly migrating across centuries like very patient travelers who never lose their luggage along the way. The written form of law also affects how people perceive responsibility and consequence. Actions become tied to fixed outcomes rather than flexible negotiation. This creates a sense of predictability within society. It feels like life itself is being gently organized into a rule book that everyone must read, whether they like it or not, even if they pretend they forgot. As you move away from the stele, its presence lingers as a silent reminder of early structured justice. The carved words remain unchanged while societies around them rise and fall. You sense that law here is not spoken but embedded, not debated, but displayed. Everything feels slow, deliberate, and permanently recorded in the patient memory of stone. In the fading light of imagination, the basalt stele stands alone, carrying centuries of human attempts to define fairness. Its surface holds both clarity and contradiction, permanence and limitation. You drift gently onward, as if leaving behind a room where every rule is still quietly waiting to be read again by someone who has time to listen. You drift into the vast reach of the Achaemenid Empire, where Persepolis rises around the 6th century BCE as a ceremonial center of imperial order. Archaeological studies show its terraces carved into the rocky plateau of southwestern Iran with extraordinary precision. The city is not built for daily life alone, but for ritual and representation of unity. It feels like someone built a stage for history itself and then forgot to turn off the lights. The grand staircases of Persepolis lead slowly upward, inviting movement that feels deliberate and almost meditative. Reliefs along the walls depict delegations from many regions bringing tribute to the Persian king. Each group is shown with distinct clothing and gifts, emphasizing diversity within structured unity. You might think of it as ancient diplomacy walking in slow motion, politely carrying very heavy symbolic objects. The reign of Darius I marks a period of administrative consolidation across a vast multi-ethnic empire. Historical inscriptions such as the Behistun inscription record political authority in multiple languages. This multilingual approach allows communication across diverse populations. It feels like the empire quietly decided that translation is not optional when you rule half the known world. You move through the imagined halls of Persepolis where stone columns rise like frozen forests of marble and limestone. The Apadana Palace once hosted ceremonial audiences with representatives from distant provinces. Archaeological remains suggest careful spatial design for processional rituals. It is almost like architecture itself is participating in a very slow and extremely formal conversation. The construction of Persepolis involves skilled artisans from across the empire, contributing techniques and artistic styles. Evidence from inscriptions shows organized labor systems under imperial supervision. These workers shape stone into intricate reliefs and structural forms. You can imagine ancient craftsmen quietly arguing about polishing techniques while the empire politely insists on perfection. Persepolis functions primarily as a ceremonial capital rather than a residential city. Seasonal gatherings and tribute presentations define its purpose across imperial cycles. This separation of ritual space from everyday life reflects a structured political philosophy. It feels like the empire built a place that only wakes up when history decides to dress formally, stand upright, and be carefully observed. The carved reliefs at Persepolis depict processions of subject nations bringing offerings such as textiles, livestock, and precious metals. These scenes emphasize cooperation and hierarchy within the imperial system. The figures move in calm, rhythmic sequences across stone surfaces. You might see it as the ancient world's most patient parade, where nobody ever seems to be in a hurry. Inscriptions in Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian demonstrate the empire's multilingual governance strategy. This trilingual system ensures administrative clarity across vast regions. It also reflects cultural integration within imperial structure. It is like the empire built 3 simultaneous subtitles into reality to ensure understanding across diverse populations. This linguistic approach allows decrees to travel unchanged across cultural boundaries while maintaining political coherence. Officials rely on standardized translations for governance and record-keeping. Communication becomes layered yet unified. It feels like the empire is carefully translating itself into multiple voices, all saying the same message slowly and clearly. The geography surrounding Persepolis contributes to its symbolic isolation and grandeur. Positioned on a raised terrace, it overlooks vast plains and distant mountains. This elevation reinforces its ceremonial importance and authority. You feel like the city is deliberately placed above everyday reality, as if observation itself requires distance, height, and quiet separation. Trade routes across the Achaemenid Empire connect Persepolis to distant regions, including Egypt, Anatolia, and the Indus Valley. These networks facilitate exchange of goods and cultural ideas. Administrative systems maintain stability across these vast distances. It feels like the empire is gently holding many different worlds together with very patient hands. Royal iconography throughout Persepolis emphasizes harmony between diverse peoples under centralized rule. Figures are depicted with calm expressions and balanced proportions. This visual language communicates stability and order. You might think of it as political messaging written in stone but delivered with the emotional tone of a very calm library. Archaeological evidence suggests that Persepolis was deliberately destroyed by Alexander the Great in 330 BCE. Fire damage is visible in many remaining structures, yet stone foundations survive, preserving memory of former grandeur. It is like history tried to erase the city, but stone quietly refused to disappear. Even after destruction, architectural remains continue to anchor the site within historical memory. Charred columns and broken reliefs still outline its former Design. The ruins preserve silent testimony of imperial ambition. It feels like the city chose endurance over silence, allowing fragments of its structure to outlive intention. Despite its destruction, Persepolis continues to influence later cultural and architectural traditions. Its design principles are studied for symbolic and structural clarity across disciplines. The idea of ceremonial space separated from daily life persists in later empires and civilizations. You can sense its legacy quietly echoing through time, like a faint but persistent architectural memory preserved in human imagination. The reliefs also reveal subtle details of clothing, tools, and cultural identity across the empire. These visual records provide valuable historical information for modern researchers. Each carved figure becomes a preserved fragment of lived experience. It feels like stone decided to become a very patient photographer, documenting everyone without blinking. The administrative complexity of the Achaemenid Empire relies on standardized systems of communication and taxation. Satrapies govern regional territories under imperial oversight. This decentralized structure allows flexibility while maintaining unity. It is almost like the empire invented early version of cloud computing, except the servers are provinces, and the password is loyalty. As the sun of imagination lowers over Persepolis, the marble surfaces reflect warm tones of silence and memory. The city feels suspended between presence and absence, function and symbolism. You sense that it was never meant to be fully alive all the time, only at moments of collective gathering. Everything here moves slowly, like ceremony stretching itself across centuries. When you finally drift away from the marble terraces, Persepolis remains behind as a quiet outline in the desert landscape. Its columns no longer support active rituals, but still hold the shape of intention. You feel as if you have walked through a memory built from stone rather than thought. Everything settles into stillness, as if history itself is bowing before continuing onward. You drift into Rome, where the early imperial period begins under Augustus after 27 BCE, marking the start of the Pax Romana. Archaeological evidence shows a remarkable shift toward long-term administrative stability across the Mediterranean. In this environment, the Res Gestae Divi Augusti is carved onto bronze and stone surfaces. It feels like an empire decided to write its resume in the most permanent way possible, just in case future generations needed proof of confidence. The var inscription of the Res Gestae is displayed prominently in public spaces, including locations in Ankara, where surviving copies remain today. The text lists achievements, donations, and political milestones of Augustus's reign. Its tone is measured, factual, and deliberately restrained. You might imagine it as ancient leadership quietly updating its LinkedIn profile, except nobody can scroll past it or leave comments. Augustus establishes a system of governance that emphasizes order after decades of civil conflict. Roman administrative reforms stabilize taxation, military organization, and provincial control. The inscription reflects this sense of consolidation and clarity. It feels like the empire finally remembered to breathe out after a very long and chaotic inhale. You walk through conceptual marble corridors of Roman civic life, where documentation becomes a key instrument of authority. Laws, decrees, and public records are carefully archived across the empire. Written communication ensures coherence across distant provinces. It is almost like Rome invented the idea of, "Please read the attached document carefully," and then enforced it across 3 continents. The Pax Romana, lasting roughly from 27 BCE to 180 CE, represents a prolonged era of relative stability across the Roman world. During this period, imperial administration reduces large-scale internal conflict, allowing provinces from Iberia to the Near East to operate under a more unified political framework. Historical accounts describe significant expansion in trade networks, urban growth, and economic specialization as cities become interconnected hubs of production and exchange. Infrastructure such as roads, bridges, and aqueducts develops systematically, enabling faster movement of goods, troops, and information across vast distances. It feels like the ancient Mediterranean form a coordinated system where communication travels along stone arteries with reliable consistency for its time. This integration is reinforced by standardized governance and engineering practices that support long-distance cohesion. Roman roads connect remote settlements to major urban centers like Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, while aqueduct systems ensure stable water supply for densely populated cities. Merchants, officials, and travelers move through these routes with increasing frequency, creating a sense of shared imperial space despite geographic diversity. Even administrative procedures become more uniform, reducing friction between regions with different local customs. It feels like an early continental network where information flows steadily, maintaining coherence across vast territories like a system with stable latency over centuries. Roman engineering achievements, including roads and aqueducts, support both military logistics and urban life. These structures demonstrate advanced planning and material durability. The empire invests heavily in infrastructure as a form of control and cohesion. It feels like Rome understood that if you cannot improve communication speed, you simply build more straight lines everywhere. The Res Gestae emphasizes Augustus's role in restoring peace and order after civil wars. However, historians note its selective presentation of events. The text functions as both record and political narrative. You can sense it carefully choosing what to remember, like someone writing history with an extremely precise but slightly biased editing tool. Latin inscriptions across the empire standardize communication and legal documentation. This linguistic consistency strengthens administrative unity. Even distant provinces adopt Roman legal terminology. It is like the empire decided that everyone should speak the same bureaucratic language, whether they liked it or not, preferably in very formal sentences. You observe how Roman cities become centers of administrative, economic, and cultural activity. Urban planning includes forums, baths, and amphitheaters. These spaces structure public life in predictable rhythms. It feels like the city itself is gently choreographing daily routines, making even leisure feel organized and slightly regulated. The Res Gestae also highlights Augustus's financial contributions to public works and military settlements. These acts reinforce his image as a stabilizing leader. Wealth distribution becomes part of political legitimacy. You might think of it as ancient state investment messaging, except the annual report is carved into stone and cannot be unsubscribed from. Roman society during this period experiences relative prosperity and mobility compared to earlier eras of conflict. Trade networks expand across the Mediterranean basin. Goods, ideas, and people circulate with increasing frequency. It is like the sea becomes a slow highway for cultural exchange and administrative coordination across vast regions. The physical durability of stone inscriptions ensures imperial messages survive beyond political lifespans. Many Roman monuments remain partially intact today. This permanence contrasts with the impermanence of power itself. It feels like Rome discovered that the best way to remain relevant is to outsource memory to geology itself. You move through imagined archives where scribes and officials maintain detailed records of taxation and governance. These documents form the backbone of imperial administration. Accuracy and consistency are essential for stability. It is like ancient accountants agreeing that chaos is not a valid spreadsheet category anywhere in practice. The ideology of Augustus emphasizes renewal and restoration rather than conquest alone. The Res Gestae reflects this narrative framing. It presents stability as a central achievement. You sense a calm rewriting of collective memory, where peace is carefully documented and preserved for future generations to read slowly. Roman architectural monuments across the empire reinforce unity and authority. Temples, arches, and public buildings display inscriptions of imperial achievements. These structures communicate permanence and control. It feels like the empire builds a physical language that everyone must read simply by walking through cities and provinces. Over time, the Roman system becomes a reference point for later civilizations in governance and law. Its administrative practices influence European institutional development. The legacy of inscriptions persists in political tradition. It feels like an old operating system, still quietly shaping newer versions of civilization across time. As the light fades across marble surfaces, the inscription of Augustus remains steady and unchanging. Its words describe a world of order that once felt newly established. You sense that even empires prefer to narrate themselves as stable when they are still learning how stability works. Everything here settles into a calm, measured silence carved into stone memory. You drift into the ancient Maya world, where cities like Tikal and Copan rise from dense Central American forests between 250 and 900 CE. Archaeological records show these urban centers are tied to ceremonial and astronomical cycles, shaping life, governance, and ritual practice across generations. Stone monuments called stelae record dynastic histories and ritual events in carved detail. It feels like the forest kept a very detailed diary written in stone, then slowly forgot how to read it, leaving stories preserved but no longer fully understood in their original meaning. At Copan, the stelae stand like vertical pages of a forgotten book, each carved with rulers, dates, and symbolic imagery. These inscriptions use the complex Maya long count calendar system. This system tracks time across vast cycles spanning thousands of years. You might imagine time here not as a straight line, but as a spiral staircase carved into the sky, slowly, turning without ever repeating exactly the same step. The Maya civilization demonstrates remarkable astronomical precision in its observations of planetary movements and solar cycles. Temples and observatories are aligned with celestial events, such as solstices and Venus cycles. Modern studies confirm their calculations were highly accurate for their time. It feels like ancient astronomers were quietly watching the universe, breathe, and taking very patient notes without ever needing telescopes or notifications. You walk through imagined plazas where carved stone monuments document royal lineage and political authority. These inscriptions were often commissioned to legitimize rulers and commemorate significant calendar events. Each monument connects human leadership with cosmic time. It is almost like kings were trying to synchronize their resumes with the universe's operating schedule, just to make everything feel officially approved by the stars. The city of Tikal rises as one of the most powerful Maya centers, with towering pyramids emerging above rainforest canopy. Archaeological excavations reveal complex water management systems supporting large populations. Reservoirs and canals help regulate seasonal rainfall patterns. You can almost feel the city carefully negotiating with the jungle, like someone trying to organize their life while living inside a very humid green room. Maya writing, known as glyphic script, combines logographic and syllabic elements to record language with extraordinary detail. Deciphered inscriptions reveal historical narratives, ritual practices, and astronomical records. This writing system remains one of the most sophisticated in the ancient Americas. It feels like language here is not just spoken or written, but carefully sculpted into time itself. Stelae often commemorate important calendar endings, especially cycle completions in the long count system. These cycles structure Maya perception of time and history. Ritual ceremonies mark transitions between periods of cosmic significance. You might think of it as ancient society celebrating time like a very serious festival that repeats on a schedule only mathematicians and priests fully understand. The collapse of many Maya city-states during the 8th and 9th centuries CE occurs, gradually over generations. Archaeological evidence suggests environmental stress, including drought cycles and resource depletion, plays a significant role. Political fragmentation follows, leading to population shifts. It feels like the system slowly lowers its own volume over time, rather than breaking suddenly, like a song fading into distance. Despite urban decline, many stone monuments remain standing within reclaimed jungle environments. Forest vegetation gradually envelops plazas and temples. Roots and vines grow around carved stones, but the inscriptions persist. It is almost like nature decided not to erase the story, only to gently hide it under layers of green memory. The Maya concept of time is deeply cyclical, emphasizing repetition and renewal across long cosmic intervals. Calendar systems interlock different cycles, creating a layered understanding of temporal movement. This worldview shapes both governance and ritual life. You feel as if time here behaves like overlapping waves, continuously moving but never truly stopping anywhere for long. Archaeological discoveries in the 19th and 20th centuries bring Maya sites back into global awareness. Explorers document stelae, pyramids, and inscriptions partially hidden in rainforest. Later decipherment of glyphs reveals historical complexity previously unknown. It feels like modern humanity slowly reopening a very old book that had been left in a humid library for centuries. Trade networks among Maya city-states facilitate exchange of goods such as jade, obsidian, cacao, and textiles. These networks support economic and cultural integration across regions. Carved monuments often reference alliances and tribute relationships. You might imagine ancient merchants moving through forest paths, carrying not just goods, but also fragments of political memory wrapped in cloth and dust. Religious cosmology in Maya culture connects rulers to celestial cycles and divine legitimacy. Temples serve as both spiritual and astronomical instruments. Rituals align human action with perceived cosmic order. It feels like civilization here is trying to keep rhythm with something infinitely larger, like dancers attempting to follow music played by the universe itself. The dense rainforest environment plays a crucial role in both sustaining and concealing Maya civilization. Abundant biodiversity supports agriculture, but also creates challenges for visibility and permanence. Over time, vegetation reclaims architectural spaces. It is like the forest quietly erases footprints while still remembering exactly where they once were. Even after decline, Maya cultural traditions continue among descendant communities in the region today. Languages, rituals, and agricultural practices preserve elements of ancient knowledge. This continuity bridges past and present. It feels like history refuses to fully end, choosing instead to quietly transform into daily life. Modern understanding of Maya civilization grows through archaeology, epigraphy, and environmental studies. Researchers decode inscriptions and reconstruct settlement patterns hidden beneath dense forest cover. Each discovery adds new depth to cultural memory and historical interpretation. It feels like slowly turning pages of a book that nature has carefully closed but never fully discarded or forgotten. In this living landscape, ancient structures remain intertwined with ecological processes. Temples and plazas exist alongside thriving ecosystems that reshape them over time. The boundary between nature and civilization becomes fluid. Everything feels like a continuous exchange between human memory and forest growth, unfolding without clear beginning or end. As you drift away from these stone cities, the monuments remain scattered across a living jungle, half visible through branches and mist. Their carvings hold calendars, rulers, and celestial cycles frozen in silence. Everything feels suspended between disappearance and endurance, as if time itself is gently resting on stone surfaces that still remember how to speak without sound. You drift into the vast landscape of Angkor, where the Khmer Empire reaches its height between the 9th and 13th centuries CE. Archaeological surveys using modern satellite imaging reveal an intricate hydraulic network beneath the forest floor. Reservoirs, canals, and embankments stretch across hundreds of square kilometers. It feels like someone tried to teach water how to follow very patient architectural instructions, and mostly succeeded. The city of Angkor is not built as a single urban center, but as a vast interconnected water-managed landscape. The Barai reservoirs, including the West Barai, store immense quantities of monsoon water. These systems regulate both agriculture and urban stability. You might imagine the entire region quietly breathing with the rhythm of rain, like a sleeping giant adjusting its posture with each season. Water management in the Khmer Empire reflects advanced engineering knowledge adapted to seasonal monsoon cycles. Canals distribute water during dry periods and redirect excess during heavy rains. This balance allows sustained rice cultivation across large areas. It feels like civilization here is carefully negotiating with weather, like trying to schedule meetings with someone who only replies in storms. Angkor Wat, constructed in the early 12th century under Surya Varman II, stands as both temple and symbolic mountain. Its design reflects Hindu cosmology and imperial authority. The temple complex aligns with celestial and geographic principles. You might think of it as a sacred blueprint carved into stone, where architecture tries to become a mirror of the universe itself. Inscriptions found at Angkor reveal administrative records detailing land use, temple resources, and labor organization. These texts demonstrate a highly structured society dependent on coordinated water systems. The bureaucracy ensures maintenance of canals and reservoirs. It feels like ancient officials were essentially full-time caretakers of a very large and slightly temperamental plumbing system. The hydraulic network supports intensive rice agriculture, which becomes the economic foundation of the Khmer Empire. Seasonal flooding is harnessed and distributed with precision. This allows population growth and urban expansion. You can almost sense the land being gently reshaped into a shared agreement between human planning and natural cycles of rain. Satellite. Imagery reveals that Angkor's water system is far more extensive than visible ruins suggest. Hidden channels and embankments connect distant temples and settlements. This suggests a landscape-scale urban design rather than isolated cities. It feels like the empire designed not just buildings, but an entire conversation between land and water. The prosperity of Angkor depends on the delicate balance of monsoon variability. When rainfall patterns remain stable, the system thrives. However, prolonged droughts or intense floods can disrupt hydraulic equilibrium. It is like civilization tuned to a specific rainfall frequency, where even slight distortion weakens stability. This sensitivity makes the entire system closely tied to seasonal rhythm and climate behavior. Agricultural success depends on predictable water distribution across the landscape. Small changes accumulate over time. It feels like the empire operates like a finely tuned instrument responding continuously to atmospheric conditions. From the 13th century onward, evidence suggests gradual decline in Angkor's centralized water management. Sedimentation and infrastructure. Stress accumulate over time. Political fragmentation also weakens coordinated maintenance. You might imagine canals slowly becoming less like flowing pathways and more like forgotten sentences half erased by time and vegetation. Despite this decline, religious and cultural activity continues within major temple complexes. Monks and local communities maintain spiritual practices at sites like Angkor Wat. These structures remain active places of memory. It feels like the city is no longer fully operating, but still softly dreaming of its original rhythm. The Khmer Empire's adaptation to water cycles represents one of the most sophisticated examples of environmental engineering in the ancient world. The system integrates agriculture, urban planning, and religious cosmology. Everything depends on controlled interaction with seasonal water flow. You can sense a civilization trying to make itself as fluid and responsive as the environment it inhabits. As environmental changes intensify, shifts in river flow patterns and rainfall distribution create long-term challenges. The Tonle Sap Lake system fluctuates in ways that become harder to predict. These changes affect agricultural stability. It feels like the landscape itself is slowly rewriting the rules of survival without issuing any formal announcement. Trade. Networks continue, but regional influence becomes less centralized over time. Smaller polities emerge, each adapting differently to changing conditions. Angkor remains symbolically important but less administratively dominant. You might think of it as an orchestra where the conductor has stepped back, and each instrument begins to follow its own tempo. Angkor Wat survives even as surrounding urban infrastructure fades into forest. Stone structures endure due to durable construction and spiritual significance. Vegetation slowly surrounds but does not erase them. It is like nature gently frames the temple instead of replacing it, as if acknowledging its quiet dignity and presence. Over time, the temple becomes part of a living landscape where forest and architecture coexist. Roots and vines trace along stone surfaces without fully destroying them. Human creation and natural growth merge softly. It feels like time itself has chosen balance here, allowing memory to remain visible, yet gently transformed. Modern archaeological research reveals how deeply interconnected water, politics, and religion were in Khmer society. The hydraulic system is understood as both practical and symbolic infrastructure. It represents harmony between human design and natural cycles. It feels like the empire was built on listening to water, not controlling it. Even in partial ruin, Angkor continues to influence cultural identity in Cambodia today. The image of Angkor Wat remains a national symbol of heritage and continuity. Ancient stone structures still resonate within modern memory. It feels like history did not end here but simply softened into a whisper through time. This lingering presence connects past and present through landscape, architecture, and shared cultural identity. Modern life and ancient stone coexist within the same geographic space. The empire's memory persists in subtle forms. It feels like time itself has chosen to echo, rather than erase what once existed. As you drift away from the Water Kingdom, the canals, reservoirs, and temples remain scattered across a landscape slowly reclaimed by forest. The system that once shaped entire regions now exists as traces beneath soil and vegetation. Everything feels like a memory of movement frozen into earth and stone, gently fading but never fully gone.